Now, and Senator Jeff Merkley has introduced a bill that would, among other things, it would end the Electoral College, which is a subject dear to many people's hearts, especially in the aftermath of the 2016 election. But for many people, it's a goal that precedes that election. So he has been kind enough to come back on the program to talk about that and perhaps what's going on at the border as well. Senator Merkley, as I'm sure you know, serves as a United States Senator from Oregon and has done so since 2009. He is a Democrat and he joins us now. So first of all, Senator Merkley, thank you for coming back on the program.
Oh, you're welcome, Richard. I'm delighted to be with you.
We're delighted to have you. And secondly, let's talk about the bill, your plan to introduce legislation that would, as part of a package of electoral reform measures, abolish the Electoral College. Let's talk about that. The Electoral College has been part of the process basically since the beginning, as I understand it. It's lasted a long time. Why do we need to abolish it?
Well, I tell you, the really big problem with it is that it results in individuals running for president not campaigning in every corner of the country. Because states, in most cases, allocate their votes to the individual who wins in their state, it means that neither blue nor red candidates have an incentive to go to states that are very red or very blue. And so many Americans really are on the sidelines for the presidential election. And that's just not the way it should be. Going to direct popular vote means every candidate has an incentive to campaign everywhere. For Democrats to campaign on Republican turf and vice versa. If they can move independents, if they can move some of the other party, those votes matter in situations where they don't matter right now.
So take me for an example. I lived for a number of years in California. California has and before that in New York, I live in the DC area now, but before that, in California and New York, I generally lived in states that were considered to be pretty safe Democratic. So that means, in effect, that even though they're both large population states, California, of course, the largest, that my vote counted less.
Well, that's right, because the candidates didn't have an incentive to go to California or to go to New York except to raise money, and that's normally in a rarefied atmosphere of well-to-do homes and clubs. That's not campaigning to speak to the people, to speak to the heart, to speak to the challenges we face as society. And so when every vote counts, now it's the Republican has a real incentive to go to California and New York.
To campaign not just among those who are generous donors, but to campaign among people who are actually voters. And what does how does proportionality fit into this, if at all? I mean, I know that you are a senator. That one of the major criticisms of the Senate is that someone from a small state gets to their vote counts much more than someone from a large state, goes the argument. That's not entirely true about the Electoral College, but is it in fact truly proportional, or is that another problem with it?
No, because the Electoral College counts the number of members of Congress that you have. So if you have, for example, 2 House members and 2 Senate members, you have 4 votes. However, if your population was twice that, you wouldn't have twice the number of votes because you would have 4 House members and 2 senators, only 6 votes. So in other words, there is a lot of extra power in the Electoral College to the small states. So that is another issue. I should mention that I have introduced a constitutional amendment on this topic. Constitutional amendments are extremely difficult to achieve, especially when one party fiercely opposes the concept behind them, and the Republicans fiercely oppose the concept of one person, one vote when it comes to electing a president. That means we have to look at other strategies, and there is another way to get there. It's called the national popular vote. And in that uses the existing Constitution, our Constitution, which says states can allocate their Electoral College votes any way they want. So if enough states decide to allocate those votes to the winner of the popular vote, we get to the popular vote under our existing Constitution. And I think this is an excellent strategy. And my home state is joining this strategy this year, my state of Oregon. And that puts us at about around 200 of the 270 votes needed to get through to a popular vote within our existing Constitution.
Here's one of the objections, Senator Merkley, that people have made. Although the idea is great in principle, one of the concerns that people often express about that idea is that if the Democratic-leaning states immediately and voluntarily do this, but the Republican leaning states do not, then is it a form of unilateral disarmament on the part of those who would like to see more representative democracy? What's your thinking there?
No, that's not actually an issue at all, because the way it's a state compact, and that state compact would only be advocated or implemented, would only be put to work once there are enough electoral votes to accomplish the objective. And so you're not, no state is saying we will allocate our votes to the winner, even if our state voted against that person, until the point that we actually are in a situation where it would result in the winner of the popular vote gaining the presidency. So there's no unilateral disarmament.
Okay, because I have heard that expressed, and I'm looking at your blueprint for democracy now, Senator Jeff Merkley, and these are only a couple of the measures. You also talk about gerrymandering, about ending dark money, about expanding the rights of voters. So I assume each of these dimensions, because we do have a democracy problem. I think very few people listening to this program would disagree with that our democracy needs a lot of help right now. Each of these would presumably have legislation that goes along with it unless a constitutional amendment is required?
Yes, no, that's right. And in the Senate, Senator Tom Udall and I have led the Democrats in introducing the For the People Act that takes on the gerrymandering through independent commissions to allocate districts. It takes on the dark money, which is that Citizens United money is the exact opposite of the intention of our Constitution. It completely violates the premise that Jefferson laid out in crafting the Constitution. And it takes on the voter suppression and intimidation. If you really believe in the vision of our country, you believe in voter engagement and empowerment, not voter suppression and intimidation.
Well, this gets to another question that I really wanted to ask you about the politics of all of this, because while I'm not always the first guy to go to bipartisanship, for me, I think bipartisanship is making sure both wings of the Democratic Party are on board. But when it comes to these types of issues, restoring our democracy, making sure that everybody gets a chance to vote, making sure that all votes are counted, making sure that people can get into the polling place regardless of what part of town they live in, all of these dimensions to our democracy in crisis, it strikes me that at least among voters, most of the Republicans I talk to, Republican voters at least, are all on board with this. Now, you might meet some who think, well, are now defending the Electoral College because they feel it's why Trump got in. But so I guess if they're loyal Trump people, they might not feel that way. But by and large, most people I talk to, including state legislators who are Republicans, whatever, they will always say, yeah, I wish we had, a functioning democracy. So when you're trying to pass something like this, is it realistic to think that perhaps Republican voters and perhaps even a few Republican politicians might come on board, or is it a bridge too far?
I think it's going to be difficult to get many of our Republican colleagues in the Senate to join us. And the reason why is in 2014, the Koch brothers put hundreds of millions of dollars into Senate elections under Citizens United. And they turned 6 seats from blue to red and took control of the Senate and therefore control of the nomination process and control of the judgeships. And that enabled them to run an agenda in 2017 that consisted of 2 things: take down or destroy health care for 20 to 30 million Americans, and pass a tax bill that takes $2 trillion, if you include interest, $2 trillion out of the Treasury and gives it to the best off Americans. Now, I can tell you that is not for the people government. I have a lot of town halls in Oregon, one average every 10 days. This year I'll be close to 400 of them since I was elected 10 years ago. And no one has ever come to a town hall and said, I've got this great idea. Why don't you raid the federal treasury and give it to the money to the people who need it the least? So that is government for the privileged and the powerful. And it was set up as a result of that Citizens United money flooding our campaigns. And now the Republican Party is completely beholden to this system of a very small circle of powerful elites who want to bend the laws to their favor. And so they do not want to have voter engagement. They do not want to shine a light on the dark money. They do not want to have independent commissions to stop gerrymandering. They are benefiting, and this is just raw power politics. And they're not going to let it go. Mitch McConnell called in his caucus and lectured them that no Republican should get onto the For the People bill. It is their lifeblood, it is corrupt, and we must find a way to end it.
You know, sadly, Senator Merkley, I can't say I'm entirely surprised by that answer, but I would say, is it at all possible, in your view, since you do so many town halls, you do meet with voters, to go over the heads, if you will, of your colleagues on this one and actually reach Republican voters on this, or are they just by now so insulated with separate media and separate talking points and so on that that's just a tough sell to them as well? What do you think?
In my 36 counties where I hold town halls each year, 22 of them are very, very red. And when I talk about the corruption of our Constitution by powerful interests and the gerrymandering, the voter suppression, the dark money, people are very, very supportive of what I'm saying. They want me to take this on. So the conversation at the grassroots, at the base, is very different from the conversation in Washington, D.C. and the Republican caucus. One of the challenges we have, though, is, as you point out, that Fox News is the primary source of news for most of my red counties, and what they are hearing on Fox News is that restoring our democracy is some evil plot, and so that's a big problem.
See, I fully understood. Well, Senator Merkley, before I let you go, I do want to also ask you about the border crisis, because you released a document, I believe it was in January, whistleblower document showing that the Trump administration was amplifying the border crisis with legal threats and plans of even more draconian action. You've been down there and gotten some exposure in the press to the cages and other horrible practices going on down there. Is there any update on that front you can share with us? Yes,
there is. Child separations, which is probably the most dark and evil thing that has happened by our government in my lifetime, has mostly ended, not completely. The Tornillo child prison camp that held some 2,800 children in December has been shut down, so that's progress. Just recently, we had documents released that showed that the Trump administration knew they had no system for reconnecting children to their parents, so reunifying them, even while they were testifying on Capitol Hill, that they could do it at the stroke of a key. No planning took place in terms of caring about the welfare of children. This whole idea of traumatizing children as a strategy to deter migrants, first, it doesn't work, because when people are fleeing persecution, religious persecution, starvation, war, they flee first and worry about the border later. The second is to injure children deliberately, as this administration has been doing, has no foundation under any religious tradition or moral code. And so it has to end. I'm really proud of Americans for reacting so strongly against the Trump child separation policy and the mistreatment of migrant children and migrant families. And we're going to have to keep at it, though, because even as I'm talking to you, the administration is trying to set up a vast system of internment camps to lock up children with their parents.
Well, we appreciate your good work in that area very much, and we appreciate the update, and we will be following that story. So with that, Senator Jeff Merkley of Oregon, thanks so much for coming on the program.
You're welcome, Richard. Great to be with you. Thank you.